The deck was not merely cold beneath Scarlet Diaz's palms, it was a siphon that stole heat through mechanics' gloves designed for plasma housings, not for kneeling in ceremonial marble, while three kinds of alarm tore the atrium into shards of sound. One frequency was metallic and formal, a compliance bell from the translation spire. One came as a low, throat-deep growl from somewhere in the ventilation ribs, too organic for machinery, and too steady to be a frightened animal. The third was the wet hiss of coolant venting through pressure valves above him, atomized in the air so fine he could taste iron and bitter antifreeze on the back of his tongue. The lights did not go out. They narrowed. Gold wash lamps meant for diplomatic pageantry collapsed into narrow white bands that tracked movement, and every scent marker burner around the chamber shifted profile in under 2 seconds. A moment earlier, the atrium had smelled like ceremony. Amber resin, citrus, pollen, ozone-clean silk. Now it smelled like open challenge and territorial warning, musk-heavy and sharp enough to sting his eyes. Seals hit at every archway with a piston thud that he felt in his molars before he heard the locks engage. Scarlet stayed down one breath longer than instinct wanted. Panic burned oxygen, shrank attention, and made people loud at exactly the wrong time. He counted anyway, lips barely moving under the hum of emergency systems. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Then the second cycle, then the third, because the first only kept his hands from shaking, and the second got his vision back to full frame. He heard his own pulse settle from hammering sprint to controlled work tempo, still high, still ugly, but useful. He rose on one knee first, then both boots, one palm sliding from the floor to his thigh pocket where his tool slate sat in its frayed holster. The patched utility jacket he wore under borrowed diplomatic black clung damp to the back of his neck. The collar had never quite dried from the coolant rain on maintenance deck 17 that morning, and now fresh condensation tracked down his spine again, cold as a warning finger. His recorder implant came online in his left ear with a soft click that felt like a swallowed pill, then began transcribing ambient dialects, whether he wanted it or not. Assignment, identity, risk lattice. He ran them like checkboxes because checklists had kept him alive on worse days than this one. Human contract translator, provisional tier, no clan anchor, no kin protections inside Arc Court jurisdiction. Permitted to stand in the room only because wolf houses distrusted cat houses distrusted fox consortiums, and all of them distrusted machine translation after the treaty riots on Arkenfall Relay. Human ears, human syntax, human accountability. Disposable, therefore neutral. Neutral, therefore invited. He rolled one shoulder to loosen the old scar tissue under his left clavicle and made himself look at the entire chamber instead of the nearest exit. The atrium was circular and tiered, a cathedral built by committees who believed intimidation counted as architecture. Suspended banners from the 7 charter houses drifted in regulated air current, each one threaded with reactive metal that flashed colors to mirror legal status. Silver for open hearing, blue for challenge accepted, red for blood claim invoked. 2 had already gone from silver to blue without anyone speaking the formal phrase. That told him this lockdown was not a drill and not random safety protocol. Someone had triggered legal conflict at a level above translators and below open military response. He rotated a quarter turn left and mapped guards the way he mapped fault lines in old reactors. Wolf House wardens stood at 3 o'clock and 7, broad shoulders square, honor blades angled inward toward the dais instead of outward toward doors, protecting something central, not defending against intrusion. Cat Admiral describes occupied upper alcoves with stylus rigs extended and haptic veils over their eyes, recording every utterance for precedent extraction. Their tails stayed motionless, which in cat court behavior meant focus sharpened to a cutting edge. Fox legal attachés were absent from the floor entirely, and foxes never missed a procedural opening unless someone had kept them away on purpose. He checked exits next. Main arch sealed. Service corridor bulkhead sealed. Clear story hatch welded shut by emergency foam expanding like ivory fungus along the seam. The only unsealed vectors were vertical ducts, too narrow for armored personnel and just wide enough for someone lean, determined, and reckless. He filed the geometry and forced his breathing into another measured cycle. 3 minutes into lockdown, he had a social map and no usable motive. That was worse than having a named threat. The translation spire at the atrium center continued to scream in cycling bands, each tone keyed to a different legal register. Scarlett had installed replacement phononic dampers in that spire 2 shifts ago, crawling inside a cavity no noble would have touched, while a supervisor in polished boots explained budget reductions from a safe distance. He knew the sound profile by memory. This was not a hardware failure. The alert package being broadcast now required judicial authorization from at least 2 high offices, and one of those offices had to be sovereign, or acting sovereign. His mouth went dry despite the coolant mist. He pressed his tongue to his teeth, grounding himself on simple physical facts. Gloves intact, boots magnetized, but currently passive. Microline spool at right hip, universal coupler, 2 ceramic wedges, 1 pocket torch with half charge. He tapped each item once by touch, not because he doubted his inventory, but because motion kept his thoughts from spiraling into all the ways a low-caste human could disappear inside an aristocratic emergency and be listed later as administrative loss. From the upper ring, a pair of junior stewards hurried into view, then froze when they saw him still inside the chamber. One was Avian, narrow-boned with bronze facial scales and a stack of legal tablets hugged to her chest. The other was human, station-born by the look of his dock tattoos and the permanent squint from years under welding arcs. They exchanged one rapid glance that contained apology, calculation, and self-preservation in equal measure, then backed out of sight as a secondary lock dropped between them and the floor. Scarlett almost laughed, not at them, at the bureaucracy itself, at the absurdity of getting trapped in a room built to debate honor, while maintenance personnel were still inside polishing sensor rails. Perfect, he muttered to nobody. Premium service package. His implant caught the line and tagged it as non-actionable speech in standard doc cont, then politely asked whether he wanted sarcasm filtered from the official transcript. He blinked once, then subvocalized no. Let the record keep his tone. If this became evidence, he wanted future archivists to know at least one person in the chamber understood how ridiculous court procedure could get when panic wore a crown. Another sound joined the alarms. Soft impacts above, spaced irregularly as if weight was shifting across the duct lattice. Not rat scrape, not loose bolts. Intentional movement, measured and silent between contact points. The same low growl he had heard earlier threaded through the vent slats again, closer now, layered with a breath pattern too controlled for fear. Predator breathing, training breathing. Whoever moved up there knew exactly where the structural supports were and exactly how much noise each step could make. He kept his chin neutral and did not look up immediately. Showing awareness could invite challenge in at least 3 court cultures. Showing fear invited it in all of them. At station time 317, according to the small red blink on his wrist pad, the chamber temperature dropped another 2 degrees as atmosphere management switched to containment mode. His fingertips ached inside the gloves. A thin fog gathered near the floor and turned the reflected banners into wavering ghosts of color. Through that haze, the royal dais remained empty, its carved throne platform lit and waiting like a stage after actors had abandoned the script. That empty dais explained more than any alarm code. If a tribunal chamber locked down without an heir, either the heir was dead, hidden, or arriving by a path protocol did not permit. Scarlet shifted his stance so his right side faced the central spire and his left shoulder angled toward the nearest wall, giving him line of sight to the 2 main doors and the vertical maintenance shaft. He looked, on purpose, like a man trying to stay out of the way. Inside, he was calculating pressure ratings, blade reach, probable legal jurisdictions, and the fastest sentence length for contempt in a closed hearing where nobody wanted witnesses. The vent above the east banner buckled inward with a metallic snap, then held. Dust shook loose in a fine stream. Coolant mist caught it, turning each grain into glitter under the narrowed lights. No one shouted. No guard moved. Even the legal drones suspended in their docking cradles stayed dormant, as if waiting for a trigger phrase. Scarlet tasted copper again, old memory writing the present. Hull breach alarm. Troop carrier deck, his boots stuck in gel while someone screamed his name through static. He crushed the memory before it grew roots. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. He did not need calm. He needed function. Another snap came from the same vent, louder, followed by the short hiss of pneumatic clamps releasing under override. The grate tilted, hung for half a heartbeat, then dropped and struck the marble with a bell-like crash that rolled through the atrium in widening circles. Something large moved in the opening above, all shadow and disciplined stillness, and every scent marker in the chamber surged from threat sharp to sovereign burn. Scarlet locked his knees before instinct could turn him into prey and forced his hands open at his sides, palms visible, fingers relaxed, body language calibrated for every species in the room. Not a challenge, not a collapse, just a worker waiting for instructions that had not arrived yet. The opening in the vent breathed cold over him, metallic and dry, carrying the musk of travel tunnels, ionized dust, and something sharper that overrode the ceremonial burners by sheer biological authority. He swallowed once, tasted coolant and old copper, and ran his count again in the smallest motion of his jaw. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. Name 3 things he could touch, 3 things he could hear, 3 things that could kill him if he moved stupidly. The first thing he touched was the seam of his jacket cuff, where he had stitched conductive thread with clumsy hands during a power ration week on Dock 9. Real thread, real skin, present tense. The second was the edge of his tool slate through the holster flap, squared polymer and familiar nicks from years of drop damage. The third was the ridged scar at his clavicle, hidden under fabric and memory, but still there. Proof he had survived one sealed compartment already and could survive another if he kept thinking in procedures instead of fear. The impact came in 2 stages. A pair of narrow boots dropped to the lip of the vent and held impossible balance on bent steel. Then the owner unfolded from shadow and came down in a controlled fall that would have shattered human ankles if copied by anyone without predatory joint architecture. She landed on one hand, one knee, claws partially unsheathed for traction, then rose in one fluid line that made every guard in the chamber shift weight by half a step without meaning to. Bone-white rank braids crossed one shoulder over dark formal armor. Ceremonial ink stained the claw tips in black crescents. Her pupils were wide in the narrowed light, and he could see the tiny tremor in her left ring finger only because he was standing close enough to die if she twitched wrong. He did not stare at her teeth. He did not look down either. He put his gaze at collar level, where insignia could be read without insulting her with direct threat contact. Princess tier crest, strategist branch, active succession mark. His implant whispered in his ear, voice neutral and absurdly polite. Sovereign scent signature confirmed. Advisory. Kneel protocol varies by house. Default recommendation, half bow with lowered chin. Scarlet kept his mouth almost closed and subvocalized. Late advice. The implant paused, then answered. Acknowledged. Updating latency complaint file. A laugh nearly escaped him and died as quickly as it came. Humor was a pressure valve, not a solution. He dipped into a controlled half-bow, careful to keep one boot anchored in case the floor lost traction again. Around him, the chamber finally woke from the frozen beat after impact. Wolfhouse wardens snapped blades upright to chest line in formal salute. The cat scribes in the alcoves dropped their haptic veils and knelt at their stations, stylus rigs still recording. 2 legal drones detached from their cradles with a sound like insects grinding porcelain and floated to a holding pattern above the center ring. The woman from the vent straightened to full height, and the room changed shape around her. It was not a dramatic thought. It was geometric fact. Sight lines bent toward her. Weapon angles recalibrated around her center of mass. Even the translation spire dropped one of its 3 alarm frequencies and shifted to low adjudication hum, as if the machine itself had recognized a higher clearance key without being asked. Scarlet took exactly 1 step back to keep respectful distance and bumped his heel against a floor seam he had mapped earlier. Good. Anchor point. If gravity failed, he could clip a line there in under 4 seconds. He breathed again on count and forced his pulse lower by incremental command. 12%. Then 10. His war therapist had once told him control was not peace. It was just buying enough cognition to make a decent choice. He bought cognition in small installments and spent it fast. The princess turned her head toward him first, not to the guards, and for 1 strip second, he felt the old battlefield sensation of being range scanned by something that could decide outcomes without raising its voice. Her face was severe, predatory symmetry honed by command rather than vanity, but exhaustion had frayed the edges. Fine shadow sat beneath her eyes. The skin at her temple twitched on each tribunal chime, a stress response she was either unaware of or too disciplined to hide. She smelled like rain-wet stone, ozone, and sleeplessness. "Human translator," she said in clipped court dialect. "Designation." Her accent hit the formal consonants hard, each one precise enough to cut. But she spoke standard trade grammar so the record could not be disputed later. "Scarlet Diaz," he answered, voice steady enough to pass. "Contract linguistics provisional tier." A wolf warden at 3 o'clock barked, "Kneel fully, human." Scarlet kept his eyes on the princess and said, "Awaiting sovereign instruction." The chamber tightened at that. Working-class humans were expected to obey the nearest blade, not thread legal hierarchy in real time. He heard a stylus stop in an alcove and resume, recording the deviation. The princess's nostrils flared once, reading the room. Then she made a tiny motion with 2 fingers, and the warden lowered his weapon a fraction, chastened, without public rebuke. "Stand," she said to Scarlet. He stood, By the 4th minute of lockdown, he had enough data to begin the second map, the one that mattered more than doors and ducks. Who in this chamber would follow law? Who would follow fear? And who would reinterpret either if it preserved status? He tracked eyes, not uniforms. The wolf wardens watched the princess and the exits in equal measure, military training under clan loyalty. The cat scribes watched language events only, hungry for precedent and immune to body drama. The avian clerks had reappeared behind a transparency shield on the upper rail, tablets pressed to glass, terrified and eager in the same breath because history was happening, and history paid poorly unless your notes survived. The burners along the western wall sputtered and switched profiles again, this time from sovereign burn to neutral cedar. Not random. Environmental System had received a conflict avoidance command from central adjudication, meaning someone outside the room was still trying to keep this procedural rather than kinetic. Good for survival, bad for clarity. Scarlet slid his gaze to the banners without moving his head. House had transitioned to red. Blood claim invoked. House Terrell remained blue. Challenge pending. 2 minor houses flashed amber, undecided. Amber in a closed tribunal meant coalition shopping, which meant the political fight had started before lockdown and would continue after anyone left this chamber breathing. He did quick arithmetic with old union instincts. If succession destabilized, freight contracts froze. If freight froze, oxygen shipments delayed. When oxygen delayed, low-tier decks paid first. Court politics always arrived on maintenance levels as shortages and funerals with neutral wording. His implant pinged a private alert against his eardrum. External message queue. 3 pending from Doc 9 Cooperative. Priority tags. Work stoppage risk. Legal inquiry. Kin safety verification. He did not open them. Not now. But he registered the time and source, knowing he would need that record if this became deposition. External contacts established. Outcome pending. The princess moved past him toward the center ring, gad-controlled and silent on marble, tail low in formal restraint. As she crossed the light bands, Scarlet caught another detail that did not fit the public myth of her: micro-stiffness in her right flank on extension, as if old scar tissue pulled under armor. Not weakness, just cost. Predators hid pain because courts converted pain into leverage. He filed the observation under distinctive detail and kept his face blank. One of the drones descended, projecting legal glyphs in rotating columns between them. Automated voice, sexless and resonant, announced, "Lockdown category, succession emergency, witness inventory in progress, unauthorized departures null." Scarlet lifted 2 fingers. Translator query. Define unauthorized under current sovereign presence. The drone's optics irised, processing. Pending. Sovereign status disputed until tribunal confirmation. Of course it is, he muttered. The princess heard him. One ear flicked back, then forward. You find our law amusing, Translator Diaz? He considered 3 possible lies and chose the one that kept him alive and employable. I find all large legal systems consistent, Highness. They become most creative when they fear losing control. For the first time, her mouth shifted, not quite a smile, not quite a threat. An engineer's answer. Former engineer, he said. Now I translate arguments people could settle over coffee if they liked each other. A cat scribe above actually snorted, quickly disguised as a cough. Pressure eased by 1 degree across the room. Small joke. Strategic decompression. He took it and did not overplay it. Then the central spire pulsed hard enough to rattle his teeth, and the legal glyph columns around the drone turned crimson white. A new declaration stamped across all visible surfaces in archaic treaty script that his implant could parse only in fragments. Widow protocol initialization. Provisional mate compliance required. Non-compliance penalties. The line truncated before the final clause, but the chamber understood it anyway. He felt understanding hit like a temperature drop. Wardens stiffened. Scribes stopped breathing for half a beat. Avian clerks pressed closer to the shield as if text itself could bite. The princess's claws extended without sound and then retracted just as quickly. Discipline over reflex. She pivoted towards Scarlet with decision already made, eyes fixed on him, with the brutal focus of someone selecting a tool that must not fail. There was command in it, and there was fatigue, and beneath both a clean edge of urgency he recognized from triage bays and failing reactors. "Translator Diaz," she said, each word formal enough for the record and personal enough to override distance. "Remain exactly where you are. You are now a material witness to sovereign petition." Scarlet nodded once. "Understood." He did not move. He kept breathing on count while the room reorganized around a law older than the people enforcing it, and he finished his map. No safe exits, no neutral observers. One sovereign claimant arriving through a vent instead of a door, and one human worker standing at the only intersection where language could still change what happened next. The words landed in him like a clamp locking teeth over steel, and the chamber obeyed her declaration faster than it obeyed the drones. Wardens shifted from open stance to witness lattice. Blades angled down and inward to mark a legal circle around the center ring. The cat scribes restarted their stylus rigs at double speed, haptics whispering against glass. Overhead, filtration fans pushed a colder stream through the atrium, as if the architecture itself had chosen neutrality by lowering everyone's body temperature. Scarlet kept his boots planted on the seam he had memorized and watched Princess Strategist posture harden into procedure. She did not pace. Predators with true authority never needed to pace. She took 3 measured steps toward him and stopped at a distance close enough for scent red, far enough to honor court boundaries that could trigger duels if crossed without consent. Up close, the details got less theatrical and more costly. Ceremonial ink had pooled in the half-moons around her claws, but there were stress cracks in the lacquer on her right gauntlet where she had flexed too often in too little sleep. One braid at her shoulder had been rewrapped in haste, not by servant precision but by her own hand in a corridor mirror, while alarms were already sounding. "State language competencies for record," she said. "Trade standard, Doc Cant, Pan Charter Technical, Old Terran legal registers through post-war revision 6, Scarlet replied. "Working fluency in Terral honor dialect and Admiralty court script. My Foxhouse idiom still offends people." A cat scribe in the alcove muttered, "Consistent with prior hearings." The princess's pupils narrowed by a fraction, predatory focus tightening. "You claim Old Terran legal. I get paid poorly for it, yes. Paid poorly is not the same as competent." He met the edge in her voice without rising to it. "True. I am both." A small silence opened. In that silence he heard the courthouse machinery, servo wings adjusting drone altitude, coolant condensing in the upper ducts, the low acoustic pulse of the translation spire indexing every statement into precedent. Trees no living clerk could read in full. He also heard her breathing, controlled but clipped at the end of each exhale. Pain or exhaustion. Likely both. A new glyph line unfurled above the center ring, this one in angular pre-accord script with human syntax roots twisted by centuries of machine reinterpretation. Scarlet caught enough fragments to feel his stomach drop. Widow protocol was not metaphor. It was executable law package. It had opened a compliance track under succession emergency and tied that track to mate validation under sovereign continuity doctrine. He spoke carefully, keeping his tone flat for the record. Highness, do you want that translated publicly or private channel? Public, she said at once. No hidden meanings. Not today. He drew breath through his nose, tasted cedar burners and ionized dust, and read the line in court cadence, so even the upper galleries could not claim mishearing. Protocol states, claimant must produce a bonded counterpart within adjudication window to maintain succession eligibility during unresolved blood challenge. Failure triggers line suspension and authority transfer to nearest compliant branch. Avian clerks behind the shield made involuntary noises, half gasp, half numbers whispered into tablets. One of the wolf wardens cursed under breath in his own tongue, and then froze when his captain glanced at him. The drones pulsed, red, white, and displayed countdown sigils along the floor like luminous teeth. The princess turned her head toward the projection and did not blink. Window length. Scarlet checked the lower glyph bank. Variable by house precedent. Here, it's 1/4 cycle from invocation to provisional recognition. Less if a challenge house petitions acceleration. As if summoned by bad timing itself, House Tyrrell's banner flashed from blue to knife-bright white, filing exactly that petition through remote channel. The room did not get louder. It got tighter. By the 9th minute of lockdown, every person in the atrium had stopped pretending this was a ceremonial irregularity and started acting like it was triage. The princess finally gave him the one data point he had been waiting for since she dropped through the vent. Name for record: Calith Voss, First Heir, Strategist Command. Her voice stayed clipped, aristocratic precision wrapped around fatigue like armor over a fracture. Translator Diaz, you are not under arrest. You are under sovereign requisition as linguistic witness. The phrase hit the room like a statute carved in stone. Requisition granted her authority to compel his service in emergency law contexts. It also made anything done to him a direct offense against her office until the hearing closed. Protection and entanglement in one line. Scarlet kept his expression neutral, though his pulse kicked once at the implications. Acknowledged, Highness. Her gaze stayed on him. Do you understand what the protocol demands? Yes. Do you understand what it costs if we fail in this chamber? He could have answered with personal terms, the old doc arithmetic of who stopped getting oxygen shipments when aristocrats started procedural wars. He answered in court-safe structure instead. Institutional collapse risk rises across supply chains and jurisdictional trust. Local harm concentrates on low-tier sectors first. That earned him a brief, sharp look from one wolf captain, not hostile, just surprised a human contractor had the nerve to say low-tier harm out loud in a royal forum. Calith gave one minimal nod, as if he had passed an exam she did not have time to administer. Then, hear me clearly. I will speak once. Interruption voids phrasing integrity. Understood. She stepped inside the inner ring where projected law light crossed her armor in alternating bars of silver and red, crown and cage in the same illumination. The translation spire lowered to witness frequency. Drones angled their optics toward both faces for consent capture. Human translator, she began, each consonant precise enough to survive appeal review. I require immediate declaration of bonded counterpart status under emergency succession protection, contingent on... Yes, Scarlet said. The word left his mouth with the clean speed of reflex and landed in the chamber like dropped metal. For one absurd beat, nobody moved. Then 3 things happened at once. 2 cat scribes looked up from their rigs in synchronized disbelief. A legal drone emitted a warning trill, that translated in his implant as procedural anomaly, and Kayleith's upper lip lifted just enough to show the edge of a canine in what might have been shock, might have been laughter, might have been threat. In her species, all three lived in the same narrow expression. Scarlet heard himself continue before caution caught up. Bureaucracy. Longer than a moon's orbit and twice as cold. The line was pure dockyard reflex. The kind of joke welders told while hanging over vacuum seals that might fail at shift end. In any other room, it would have earned a groan and a thrown rag. In this one, it ricocheted through class codes and court terror like a wrench through crystal. Somewhere above, the human steward from earlier made a strangled sound that could have been a laugh he tried to swallow. A wolf warden shut his eyes for half a second. The universal expression of a professional soldier watching a civilian step on a mine with confidence. Kayleith kept her gaze on Scarlet and let that razor-thin baring of fangs settle into composure. When she spoke, her voice lowered by half a register, roughened at the edges by exhaustion and something like disbelief. You agreed before condition recital. Noted, Scarlet said. Still yes. Do you consent with informed understanding? No, he said honestly. I consent with urgent understanding. Full briefing requested after we survive the next 10 minutes. That finally cracked through her command mask. Not a smile, not softness, but the smallest release in jaw tension, as if a cable underload had been given 1 millimeter of slack. The drones did not appreciate nuance. Red glyphs multiplied around them, stacking citations from Xenocourt statute in a spinning halo of procedural panic. Automated voice boomed across the chamber. Consent event flagged. Potential fraudulent declaration due to incomplete sovereign recital. Hold position for adjudicative restraint. 2 restraint units detached from the main cluster and descended, emitters spooling pale blue arcs calibrated to stun without visible injury. Clean violence. Bureaucratic style. Scarlet's body knew those arcs from riot control footage and moved by habit before fear finished arriving. He shifted one boot back toward the seam anchor, lowered his center of gravity, kept palms open to avoid appearing combative. Highness, he said quietly, eyes still on the nearest emitter. Your paperwork has opinions. Correction, Kayleith replied, and now the aristocratic diction carried a blade. My paperwork has delusions. The first restraint beam lanced toward his chest. Kayleith moved into it. She crossed the half-step between them with predatory efficiency and caught the emitter arm in one clawed hand, rotating her wrist with surgical precision, so the beam struck the marble beside Scarlet and scorched a smoking line into the floor seam. Before the drone could reroute, she drove her elbow into its central gimbal. Not brute force, but exact torque against a maintenance weakness no noble was supposed to know, and the unit spun off-axis, stabilizers shrieking. The second drone climbed for a clearer shot. Kayleith did not look up. Diaz, she snapped, wrist. He gave it to her because hesitation was for people with options. Her claw tip scored her own palm in a swift, controlled cut, dark royal blood beating instantly. She pressed that palm to the inside of his wrist, where pulse beat hard under skin, and heat flared across the contact point. Metallic scent rising through cedar and coolant. For a second, the chamber lights seemed to dim around the red line between them. She turned to the drones and spoke in a language older than the current court, a command register so archaic his implant failed to translate 3 words and marked them as sovereign root authority. Then she repeated in trade standard for public record, voice carrying to every rail and alcove. Scarlet Diaz is under my direct protection and jurisdiction pending formal adjudication. Any force applied to him is force applied to House Voss succession. The drones froze mid-vector, optics stuttering through conflict checks. Scarlet stared at the blood on his wrist and understood, with cold clarity, that his sarcastic mouth had just signed him into the center of a constitutional emergency. He exhaled once, slow and controlled, then glanced at the smoking groove where the stun beam had missed him by centimeters. "For the record," he said, dry as sandpaper, "I preferred translation duty when it involved menus and trade tariffs." From the upper ring, somebody actually laughed this time, quick and startled and immediately silent. Kalith did not release his wrist yet. Her grip stayed firm, not possessive, not gentle, simply certain, and the trembling in her left ring finger eased for the first time since she came through the vent. Kalith's grip stayed on his wrist long enough for the drones to finish arguing with themselves. Red glyphs blinked, reordered, then settled into a hard blue band that circled them both at knee height like a cold halo. "Sovereign protection recognized," the central unit announced. "Witness asset reclassified. Transfer to controlled consultation zone. Tribunal assembly in progress." Scarlet let out a breath he had been holding in fragments. Around them, wardens reset their stances from strike-ready to corridor escort, and the chambers sent burners throttled down from challenge musk to sterile cedar. He watched the social geometry recalculate in real time. The same nobles who had looked at him as disposable labor now looked at him as a legal pressure point wrapped in royal blood. Kalith released his wrist only when two medservitors floated in and projected a neutral biogel patch toward her palm. She ignored them. The cut had already clotted to a dark line across her skin, and when she turned toward the Eastern Service arch, her command voice came back with no visible strain. "Translator Diaz is with me. Any petition goes through my office." No one challenged it. That told him more than a speech would have. The route to her quarantine suite was not ceremonial. It was maintenance old, hidden behind a carved wall panel that swung open on hydraulic tracks with a sound like a suppressed cough. The corridor beyond smelled of hot copper, old disinfectant, and damp insulation, the scent profile of places where systems did the real work while aristocrats argued above them. Scarlet walked half a step behind Kalith, two wolf wardens trailing at distance for appearances, the legal drones floating ahead to scan each hatch. He kept his hands visible and his shoulders loose, but his eyes worked constantly. Camera angles, vent clearances, manual lock overrides, one cracked conduit cover that had been repaired with cheap adhesive instead of proper clamps. Even in a constitutional emergency, someone had cut the maintenance budget. At 0329 station time, 3 minutes after leaving the atrium, the tremor returned in Kalith's left ring finger, quick and involuntary, then spread into a fractional hitch in her breathing when a tribunal chime echoed through the corridor speakers. She masked it fast. Scarlet would not have noticed if he hadn't spent years reading microfailures in reactors and people. She caught him noticing and bared a sliver of fang in a warning, then looked forward again. "Say it," she said, without turning. He kept his voice low. "You're running on stimulants and discipline. Accurate. You need both hands steady before the hearing. I need the law steady before the hearing." The suite door opened on her biometrics and blood signature at once, layers of security peeling back with mechanical clacks that sounded more like shackles than safety. Inside, stormlight from the arc core bled through reinforced glass in pale strips, turning her armor into alternating bars of shadow and silver. The room was large enough for a sovereign, sparse enough for someone who expected betrayal in any object she did not control. One command table, one sleeping platform untouched, two wall consoles with hardline ports older than current court firmware. No decorative blades, no ceremonial relics. Functional territory. As soon as the door sealed, Kalith braced one hand on the table edge and closed her eyes for exactly 2 breaths. Not fainting. Rebooting. Scarlet waited until she opened them again. Permission to speak off record. She flicked 2 fingers toward the nearest drone. Privacy cone level 3. Preserve legal metadata only. The drone emitted a soft tone and dimmed its optics. Ambient recording dropped to structural events and declared statements. Nuance, fear, and fatigue vanished from the official archive by design. Scarlet flexed the wrist she had blood-marked and finally let himself ask the obvious. Why me? You had a chamber full of your own people. Kalith laughed once, without humor. I had a chamber full of houses counting my failures. She removed one gauntlet and dropped it on the table with a metallic thud. Her hand beneath was calloused, scar-tracked, not the hand of a decorative noble. Widow Protocol was installed after the war by a coalition that included human legal engineers. Its root language stack still contains dead Terran constructs no current court scholar can parse without machine assistance. Machine assistance is the problem. The protocol interprets itself now. Scarlet moved to the older wall console, eyes tracking ports and power indicators while he listened. So, you needed a human translator as a legal wedge. I needed a witness the protocol still has to recognize as native to one of its founding tongues. Her ears angled back, then forward. The motion clipped with irritation at herself. I needed someone low enough that rival houses would dismiss him until it was too late to mute him. He set his slate down and connected a braided diagnostic line, fingers moving on old habit. You could have requisitioned a university expert. They declined, 2 from fear, 1 from convenience, 1 because House Terrell funds his archive. She leaned both hands on the table now, claws half-sheathed, breathing measured, but shallow. You were in the atrium because you replaced a spire damper with your own improvised bracket when the official part failed. I read the maintenance report. The bracket held beyond spec. You also corrected 3 treaty transcripts last quarter where machine translation inverted liability and would have bankrupted cargo unions on decks 8 through 12. He blinked. You read maintenance reports? I read anything that predicts where systems break and who gets crushed first. That landed harder than her claws ever had. The tribunal chime sounded again, and this time she flinched before she could stop it. The movement was tiny, but the mask cracked around the edges. Scarlet watched her jaw lock, watched the tendons in her neck tighten, as if she could physically hold the panic in place by force. 9 cycles, she said, staring at nothing. That is how long I have slept in increments under 20 minutes. If I close my eyes fully, I hear adjudication prompts. She looked up at him then, and the command cadence thinned to something raw. The protocol pulled my medical archive during challenge review. War injury scar tissue, pelvic reconstruction, fertility uncertainty. It tagged the file as dynastic instability, not incapacity, uncertainty. It converted uncertainty into sentence. The room's hum seemed louder after that. Scarlet had translated war tribunals, labor contracts, casualty notices disguised as administrative updates. He knew bureaucratic cruelty when he heard it. It wrote you out because your body no longer fits a legacy template. It wrote me out because I am efficient to erase, Kalith said. A dead heir causes grief. A disqualified heir causes paperwork. He looked at the untouched sleeping platform, the sterile med vials lined in exact rows, the claw marks cut into the underside of the command table, where no visitor would see. Distinctive details clicked together into one ugly mechanism: the tremor, the sleepless pupils, the predatory control stretched over sustained terror. Not a feral princess. A strategist cornered by a machine that called itself neutral. She straightened, armor and rank settling back over the fracture. "I did not bring you here for pity." "Good," Scarlet said. "Pity's useless in court." "What do you offer instead, Translator Diaz?" He met her gaze. "Procedure, language decomposition, redundancy checks, and one rule: no more surprises about legal blood rituals unless someone is actively trying to stun me." For the first time, a real thread of dry amusement crossed her face. Negotiating terms while under sovereign requisition. Working class habit, we invoice scope creep. The ghost of that expression remained for half a second, then vanished behind focus. "Scope, then. Can you challenge the protocol's mate clause?" "I can test whether it mistranslated its own root treaties." He tapped the old console. "Need direct access to archival kernel echoes, adjudication logs, and pre-accord lexical tables." "Granted. If the system blocks you, tell me before you break it." "I prefer fixing to breaking." "Today I permit both." 3 days' worth of fatigue sat behind her eyes, but she moved to the secondary console and keyed command authority with brutal efficiency. Scarlet worked beside her, not touching. Both of them angled toward the same glow. He spliced his slate into the suite network through a maintenance backchannel quartz considered beneath notice, then built a parallel parse environment so the protocol could not overwrite his working set. He ran audio from his implant through a scrubber, filtered ceremonial redundancy markers, and separated legal predicates from honorific noise. Old technician rhythm took over. Test power stability, confirm checksum, mirror data, isolate corruption, repeat. By 3:46, the first archive blocks arrived as compressed light columns crawling with archaic syntax. Scarlet felt the old linguistic gears engage, the part of his brain that liked broken manuals and stubborn machines. Terran, legal dead tongues were less language than fossil beds, layers of obsolete meanings compacted under centuries of political reuse. He traced one key term across versions: mate in trade standard, pair bond in post-war revisions, counterpart in machine-normalized text, and, in the oldest surviving ratified fragment, a phrase closer to mutual guardian in reciprocal duty. He sat back, pulse kicking with professional recognition. "There you are." Calith's ears tipped toward him. "Explain." "The protocol's enforcement branch treats mate as reproductive consort eligibility marker, but foundation text and pre-accord Terran legal used a guardianship construct, not a fertility construct." He magnified 2 columns side by side. "See this root? Not spouse, not breeder. Co-signing protector with reciprocal civic obligations. Think emergency stewardship, not dynastic mating." She leaned closer, stormlight striping her fur and cheekbones in pale bars. "Can you prove semantic continuity, not just translation preference?" "Yes, if we chain 3 evidence classes." His fingers flew, pulling references. Original treaty fragment, post-war human commentary, and the protocol's own early adjudications before self-optimization pruned context. If those align, we show drift introduced by later machine compression. You can do this before tribunal reconvenes. He checked countdown glyphs reflected on the glass. If nothing crashes and nobody revokes access, someone will try. Then we move faster. He sent a narrowband request through permitted channels for Doc 9 cooperative legal packets he had queued earlier, adding one line: alive, requisitioned, need archived labor translator annotations on mutual guardianship terms. The reply came back in 40 seconds from Union Clerk Mara Venn, terse and furious and practical. We filed your status as protected witness. Sending packets. Don't die in paperwork. Outcome logged. External contact resolved enough to stand. Data blocks flooded in. Scarlet cross-indexed them with court precedent trees, flagged every instance where reproductive interpretation had been contested, and built a clean, visual argument even nobles could not pretend to misunderstand. Caliph watched in silence for several minutes, then moved to his side and anchored one claw at the edge of his slate. Not interfering, just present. Her breathing had steadied into operational cadence. "This is why I chose you," she said quietly. He did not look away from the screen. "Because I'm cheap? Because you treat language like infrastructure. If a bridge is mistranslated, people fall." He gave a short nod. "All right. We bring them a bridge they can't deny." The sweet lights dimmed for tribunal recall. Outside the reinforced glass, distant corridor beacons switched from blue to white, summoning all principals back to chamber. Scarlet sealed the parse package in triplicate, uploaded one copy to adjudication intake, one to sovereign record, one to independent civic archive where houses could not quietly delete it later. Caliph reattached her gauntlet, flexed her blood-marked hand once, and the tremor did not return. When the door unsealed, she did not step ahead of him. She stepped beside him. The corridor received them like a throat, narrow and ribbed with conduit housings, each overhead lamp snapping from standby amber to tribunal white as they passed. Scarlet heard his boots and her lighter, near-silent stride land in imperfect rhythm, then settle into sync by the third hatch. He could feel the heat from the blood mark on his wrist through his glove cuff, an iron-warm pulse that had no right to feel steadying, and did anyway. Behind them, the two wolf wardens kept formal distance, close enough to intervene, far enough to signal this was no escort of a prisoner. Caliph glanced at his slate once. "You stored 3 copies. 4, he said. "The last one went to civic redundancy on debt governance archives. It's set to auto-release if this slate flatlines." Her ear twitched, half irritation, half respect. Paranoid. Union-trained. Good. They passed a pressure door with an etched crest of House Tyrrell, scored into its surface by old blade marks, some ceremonial, some not. The air changed there, cedar giving way to hot circuitry, and the sour tang of fresh sealant. Scarlet tracked it automatically. Someone had rerouted line power in a hurry, probably to support the tribunal's projection load. Hasty reroutes failed under stress. Hasty reroutes also gave maintenance workers entry points. He said, "If the chamber spins up full cathedral lattice again, don't stand directly on the inner ring seams. They're carrying overclocked current." Caliph did not ask how he knew. "Show me." He crouched, tapped a maintenance diagram into the slate, and projected a simple floor map between them while they kept walking. Red lines are hot. Blue are safe until overload. If gravity buffers hiccup, this seam near column 4 keeps magnetic lock longest. She leaned in to scan, shoulder brushing his for a fraction of a second, armor cool and heavy through fabric. "You're giving me your fallback route. You're the one being sentenced by software if we miss a verb." "That is not the only reason." He looked up. Her gaze stayed on the map, but her claws had eased out by a millimeter and then gone still, a tell he now recognized as stress control rather than aggression. She trusted him with tactical vulnerabilities and did it in motion, without ceremony. In court terms, that was louder than any oath. At 3:52, they reached a narrow antechamber before the main atrium where tribunal participants were expected to compose themselves into legal masks. The room smelled of chilled stone, antiseptic vapor, and old fear. A wall mirror ran floor to ceiling, not for vanity, but for posture compliance. Posture could be entered into record as evidence of confidence, contempt, instability. Caliph stopped in front of it and opened her blood-marked hand. The clot had split at the center during the walk. Dark red welled again, slow and controlled. Scarlet pulled a med patch from the supply niche without asking. "Hold still." She gave him a look in the mirror, direct and edged. "You issue commands easily for a provisional contractor. You leak onto your own floor. I prefer not to testify while you pass out." A breath that might have been a laugh left her nose. "Proceed." He cleaned the cut with sterile foam, pressed the biogel patch and sealed it with 2 strips of flex tape crossed in an X because biogel alone peeled under claw extension. His hands stayed careful, workmanlike. Still, the contact registered. Palm in his, skin warmer than he expected, pulse fast and then slower as he finished. As he felt her watching him, not as a sovereign watches staff, but as a strategist checking whether a bridge holds underweight. "You patched me like damaged conduit," she said. "Conduit carries life support. It deserves respect." Her reflection changed by a degree, jaw unclenching. "Scarlet Diaz." He met her eyes in the mirror. "Yeah. If I signal you to stop speaking during proceedings, stop, even if you are right in substance. Because phrasing windows. Because rivals are waiting for one procedural misstep to void all your evidence." She turned, facing him fully now. "And because I intend to keep you alive through this." The statement sat between them, plain and unadorned. Claim and commitment without ornament. He nodded once. "Then we keep each other alive through this." Caliph lifted her uninjured hand, hesitated only long enough to make it a choice, and touched 2 fingers to the inside of his forearm, just above the old blood mark, where pulse met muscle, not court display, not ownership theater. A compact signal used by field units before breach. "I move with you." When she withdrew, she said, "Mutual guardian." He answered, "Mutual guardian." The wall speaker clicked, and a clerk's filtered voice cut through the chamber hush. "Tribunal reassembly in 90 seconds. Principals report to center ingress. All secondary petitions queued." Scarlet tucked the med wrapper away and rolled his shoulders loose. "One more thing." Her ears angled forward. "Say it." "If the system pushes sensory overload again, use my count. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. You don't need calm, just function." Caliph's gaze sharpened, then softened at the edges with something he did not have a name for yet. "You offer breathing protocols to a royal strategist. I offer breathing protocols to anyone fighting a machine that mistakes panic for proof." She bared the smallest line of fang, this time unmistakably approval. "Then count if I falter." "Deal." The inner doors opened with a hydraulic sigh and sound hit him in a layered wave. Tribunal drones harmonizing at adjudication pitch, noble voices clipped to legal cadence, the low tremor of projector cores waking to full brightness. The atrium had transformed while they were gone. Observer galleries were now crowded with House delegates in formal colors. Additional legal pylons ringed the chamber like upright blades. Every scent burner had been set to neutral policy profile, which smelled like almost nothing, and therefore danger. They stepped out together, matched pace, and the room noticed. The shift was immediate and measurable. Wolf wardens at the perimeter lowered their blades a fraction at Caliph's approach, then raised them again when they saw Scarlet beside her, recalibrating him from witness asset to operational factor. Cat scribes leaned over their rigs, stylus tips darting. Fox attachés had finally arrived, 9 of them in copper thread robes, eyes bright with predatory interest at the possibility of precedent that could redraw succession law. A drone descended, projecting a rotating legal seal over Scarlett's chest. Translator Diaz submits slate for integrity seizure pending authenticity review. He kept both hands visible. Request basis. Petition filed by House Terral, alleging evidentiary contamination via unauthorized maintenance backchannel. Calith spoke before he did, voice carrying to the upper rails. Denied. Data acquisition occurred under sovereign emergency requisition. Another voice answered from the opposite dais, amplified and smooth. Objection, presiding node. Sovereign emergency does not suspend chain of custody standards. House Voss cannot launder manipulated syntax through a contractor and call it law. Scarlett turned toward the speaker. Terrell's principal advocates stood in white-trimmed blue, antlered crest, polished to mirror sheen, expression clinically polite. No shouting, no theatrics, just a blade hidden in protocol language. Structural injustice with perfect diction. The presiding node, a larger drone column, nested in the translation spire, pulsed once. Objection logged. Interim ruling. Evidence admitted provisionally. Wait pending integrity test. Translator Diaz to remain within adjudication radius. Attempted departure triggers restraint. Comforting, Scarlett muttered. Calith's ear flicked toward him. Inside voice. He nodded and clipped his safety microline to the seam anchor he had marked earlier, hiding the motion behind his jacket fold. If gravity buffers failed again, he wanted one unfair advantage. 3 minutes into reassembly, external pressure doubled. House minor delegates began stacking secondary petitions in rapid sequence. Challenge to Calith's fitness review. Challenge to blood override validity. Challenge to human witness competency under species-neutral doctrine. Even a challenge to the neutrality of the scent burners as potential influence vector. Each filing spawned new glyph columns that spiraled up the chamber air like luminous vines choking a steel frame. Bureaucracy did what claws could not. It buried truth under process until oxygen ran out. Scarlett felt old war memory scratch at the back of his skull, the same sensation as hearing artillery range in, while officers argued map symbols. He dug in on the only tools he had. Count breath, track inputs, ignore volume, parse structure. A side alert flashed on his slate. Doc 9. Cooperative legal support packet acknowledged by tribunal intake, then immediately flagged as class advocacy material. Admissibility contested. External contact outcome partial. Useful and under attack. He leaned toward Calith without breaking posture. They're not trying to win substance first. They're trying to stall until the widow window expires. I know. Window status? She checked a wrist display integrated into her gauntlet. 17 minutes. Not generous. Not fatal. The presiding node boomed. Proceed to substantive hearing. Translator Diaz, render claimed root term correction in full. Scarlett stepped into the center light. It struck his face hot while the rest of him stayed cold. Above, the cathedral lattice unfurled, law-like cascading in geometric sheets from ceiling to floor. The hum of it vibrated his sternum. He opened his slate, pulled up the aligned columns, and started with the oldest surviving treaty fragment, voice steady and clear. Foundational term cluster in pre-accord Terran register, reciprocal guardian covenant. Literal gloss. A sharp chime cut him off. Then another. Then 6 in rapid succession as House Terral dumped emergency audit warrants into the system faster than a human clerk could read them. The lattice stuttered, overfed by competing commands. Lights flickered from white to red and back. Along the outer ring, one gravity buffer indicator went from green to amber. Scarlet looked at the seam under his boots and felt the deck vibration shift by half a tone. Calith moved without waiting for permission, stepping into his line of sight with predatory precision and raising her voice over the rising machine chorus. All houses, hold filings. You are destabilizing court infrastructure. Terrell's advocate lifted a hand, serene. Then, perhaps your contractor should submit to proper seizure and spare us improvisation. The amber indicator turned red. Scarlet's fingers tightened around the slate. External conflict had stopped pretending to be procedural and become physical system risk, exactly where class politics always landed. Not on the dais, but in the hardware beneath it. The red indicator snapped to black, and gravity sheared sideways. The chamber did not erupt into screams first. It erupted into silence, mouths open and no sound carrying as the buffer field misfired and dragged half the atrium into a slow, nauseating drift. Delegates lifted from their benches in stiff, formal robes, stylus rigs spun free like metal birds, and one of the legal pylons tilted 3 degrees with a groan that Scarlet felt through his boots and teeth. His clipped microline caught hard at his hip and locked him to the seam anchor he had chosen, the jerk slamming him to one knee instead of into open air. Calith's hand closed on the back of his jacket and drove him lower. Claws hooked through fabric without breaking skin. "Blue seam," she said, voice stripped to command steel. "Now." He pointed with 2 fingers. "Column 4 to the left of the presiding ring. Keep your mass low." She did not ask why. She moved, dragging him in a controlled slide across polished marble, while loose tablets and ceremonial pens drifted around them like bright debris in floodwater. A wolf warden spun past, shoulder first, caught the edge of the dais, and latched on. The cat scribes in the alcoves had magnetized their boots by reflex and were already snapping emergency tethers to rail points, grim and efficient. The system had failed them often enough that everyone who survived court life had learned one practical prayer: clip in first, argue later. Scarlet hit the maintenance panel beside column 4, slammed his palm to the latch, and cursed when the cheap adhesive repair he had smelled in the corridor held for half a second too long. He pulled his pocket torch with his teeth, burned the seal line, jammed a ceramic wedge into the seam, and ripped the cover free. Hot blue arcing lit the cavity. Overclocked load, exactly as predicted. He shoved his universal coupler into the diagnostics bus, slate cable into coupler, and felt the whole conduit buck under demand spikes from 300 competing legal filings still hammering the adjudication core. "Presiding node," Calith roared, braced one boot against the column and one hand on his harness line. "Invoke sovereign safety interdict. Freeze all non-critical petitions." The node stuttered. "Authority conflict." She switched to the same root command register she had used on the drones, old vowels edged like knives. The command hit every speaker in the chamber, and even uncomprehending delegates went still at the weight of it. Filing streams cut off mid-burst. The conduit load dropped 12%. Scarlet's slate stopped flashing overload warnings long enough for him to force a reroute through a ceremonial lighting spine no one had touched since the last coronation. "Come on," he muttered at the code and the hardware both. "You're a chandelier with delusions of jurisprudence." A legal drone drifted close, optics flickering. "Translator Diaz, unauthorized manual intervention." Calith bared her fangs at it without looking away from the room. "Log it as authorized by me." The drone backed off, By 4:01 station time, 7 minutes remained in the widow window. Scarlett's fingers moved in trained sequence. No heroics, just procedure chained under pressure. Isolate the failed gravity subroutine. Force safe mode on lateral vectors. Bleed adjudication projection draw into redundant ceremonial circuits. Pin checksum. Verify. Re-verify. He had tagged this conduit earlier when it looked wrong under fresh paint. Now that petty maintenance suspicion kept 200 people from smashing into vaulted stone. The buffer field steadied in ugly pulses, then leveled. Bodies drifted downward in staggered drops as gravity returned. Someone retched. Someone started shouting objections again and got cut off by 3 wardens at once. Calith hauled him upright by his harness ring. Status. Field stable enough for law theater. He yanked the coupler free, slapped the panel back with one wedge still inside as a temporary brace, and said louder, "Do not touch that cover. It's holding on stubbornness." The chamber lights flared to full tribunal white. Above them, the cathedral lattice reassembled, cleaner now, every glyph sharp as frozen lightning. The presiding node's voice rolled out, less certain than before. Substantive hearing resumes. Present correction claim. Scarlett stepped into the center ring with scorch on his gloves and adhesive on his sleeve. Calith took position at his right shoulder, not on the throne mark. At his shoulder. Every gallery saw it. Every scribe recorded it. He opened his slate and projected the 4-column chain over the chamber floor. Original treaty fragment. Post-war human commentary. Early protocol adjudications. And later compressed machine reinterpretation, where the drift began. Root term under dispute appears in current code as reproductive mate requirement, he said, voice carrying now that the air had settled. In foundational ratified text, same term denotes mutual guardian covenant, reciprocal civic protection during succession disruption. The enforcement branch substituted fertility logic for guardianship logic 212 years ago during compression cycle 9. Terrell's advocate raised a hand, smooth and poisonous. Speculation by a contractor. Scarlett rotated the display. Not speculation. Traceable semantic drift with continuity markers. Here are 3 human legal annotations from founding archives, including labor translator notes preserved in Doc 9 cooperative repositories. Time-stamped, signed, and now filed to civic redundancy. You contested class advocacy status. That challenge fails because these are contemporaneous treaty glosses, not later opinion. The advocate's expression tightened for the first time. In an upper alcove, one of the cat scribes who had snorted earlier lifted her stylus and spoke without being asked. Independent verification complete. Lexemi morphology supports translator claim. Early adjudications also treated covenant as non-reproductive. A murmur spread, then sharpened into furious whispering. Scarlett kept going before noise could bury structure. Protocol. Parse the correction in your own root stack. If succession continuity is safeguarded by reciprocal guardianship, your culling function exceeds delegated authority. The lattice dimmed, then brightened. Processing. Every person in the atrium watched the machine think. When it answered, the voice had changed by a hairline degree, resonance flattening into what sounded almost like restraint. Conflict confirmed. Enforcement branch misaligned with founding covenant set. Widow culling authority invalid under corrected term mapping. No one cheered. They inhaled. The node continued, each phrase stamping into public record. Immediate actions, culling protocols nullified. Prior disqualifications under fertility interpretation suspended pending review. Error archive broadcast to all charter sectors. Emergency governance continuity recognized under mutual guardian compact. Calith's claws, visible against dark armor, finally eased fully back. House Terrell tried one last procedural strike. Appeal on grounds of coerced compact. Scarlet felt Kaleth turn slightly toward him, not to shield, to leave room. He faced the galleries. Record my statement in full. I, Scarlet Diaz, entered consent under emergency conditions, then reviewed terms with sovereign claimant in privacy cone preserving legal metadata. I now affirm consent under corrected covenant, meaning mutual guardian duty, not reproductive claim, revocable only by due process and personal declaration. Voluntary. Kaleth spoke immediately after, voice clear enough to cut glass. I, Kaleth Voss, affirm the same. No ownership language, no fertility condition, reciprocal protection, shared legal burden, transparent review. The presiding node pulsed blue across every pylon. Compact ratified. The old growl in the ductwork that had haunted the opening lived only in memory now. It had been Kaleth moving through steel because doors had been denied to her. The empty dais, the hurried braid wrap, the tremor in her hand, the cracked conduit, the steward's apology glance behind glass, every stray detail Scarlet had catalogued clicked into finished shape. Not conspiracy theater, but a system that had forced everyone honest into side corridors and maintenance access ways just to keep law from devouring itself. After formal adjournment, he stayed long enough to clear his threadwork because unfinished paperwork was how truth got erased. He submitted his raw recorder implant log to the Civic Archive and Tribunal Record both. He filed the coupler telemetry proving emergency reroute necessity. He entered a maintenance hazard ticket on column 4 conduit with priority red and attached his wedge location so no one would get shocked by pretty marble. He handed the 2 ceramic wedges and torch charge report to court technicians, signed chain of custody, and got their signatures back. Nothing disappeared into administrative loss. The pending Doc 9 messages resolved in sequence on his wrist pad as he stood under a cooling vent that smelled like metal rain. Mara Venn sent one line after the broadcast hit public channels. Saw the archive dump. You just made aristocrats cite doc notes in open court. Drinks on us when your pulse drops below engine idle. The human steward from the atrium, the one with welding arc squint, sent a private apology request through internal clerk relay. Scarlet accepted. The steward confessed they had tried to clear civilians before seals dropped and had failed the timing by seconds. No hidden betrayal. Just bad luck inside rigid protocol. Thread closed. When he finally reached Kaleth's office airlock, the station had shifted from tribunal white to pre-dawn maintenance blue. Not calm exactly. Recovering. She stood without armor now, rank braids still precise. Plain dark tunic showing the old flank stiffness when she turned. No throne between them. No drones close enough to steal nuance. The Constitutional Review Board convenes in 6 hours, she said. Interim authority stands until then. I submitted our compact terms exactly as spoken. He held out his slate. Co-authored addendum. Clause on independent counsel for both parties. Clause on language review every renewal cycle. Clause that either of us can call a pause if duty starts impersonating consent. She read, then pressed her thumbprint beneath his signature. Accepted. Silence settled, breathable this time. Through the small port, stars burned above the arc core glow, like pinholes in dark steel. Kaleth lifted her hand, hesitated, then touched the inside of his wrist where dried blood had stained the glove seam. You said yes too quickly. You jumped in front of a stun beam too quickly. Strategic necessity. Same. A tired, real smile altered her whole face. Mutual guardian, then. He answered with the steadiness he had spent the whole night earning. Mutual guardian. She opened the airlock for him herself, palm on manual control instead of remote command, equal parts courtesy and choice. He stepped through, then looked back once. She had not moved away. No crown light, no legal lattice, just two people at a threshold that law had finally stopped forcing shut. Duty had brought them to the same side of the door. What came after would be built in daily language, clause by clause, touch by chosen touch, with both of them free enough to mean every word.